Welcome to today's open class. We're 7 Education. I believe some of you already know us. So for those who don't, today we're going to give an open class on SAT versus ACT. Which one is more difficult to take? All right, and today I will quickly run through the steps for today's open class. In today's class, we're going to talk mainly about the differences between SAT and ACT. 就是 ACT， 我知道这个在场有一些家长哈，所以我尽量的用中英文来做一个简单的介绍，然后我们就迅速的进入到课程当中去。那么在 SAT 改革之后，大家都知道，题型做出了一些变化。那究竟 SAT 跟 ACT 哪个更难？哪个呢？相对来说容易短期内批分？我们知道外面有很多这种对比。那么今天我们想换一个方法，我们会用 ACT 跟 SAT 各部分的题型，用真题来向大家展示 ACT 跟 SAT 的题出的有什么不一样。那在解题当中呢，有什么技巧？然后最后呢，我们希望通过这个课程，能够使得家长和孩子们能够明白 ，OK， 我更适合于哪个考试。很快的做个 introduction， 这本部分的考试依然还是由我们的刘燕老师和刘军老师，军老师 Dr. Yan 他们2位来主讲。首先呢，会由这个 Dr. 刘来说一下 Math 和 Science part。那我非常快的做个介绍哈。For those who don't join for the first time， 刘燕老师是这个大学的终身教授他之前在斯坦福做过博士后，并且是在 Coursera 做过这个 data scientist。刘燕博士他有13年的这个教学经验在数学，尤其是在数学跟 statistics 方面有着非常高的造诣。刘军老师这个原来是新东方有10年多的教学经验。那么呢，他一直是从事着 SAT， 尤其是 SAT 跟 ACT 方面考试 strategy 的研究。刘军老师他 believe a good foundation is important, but a set of strategy is essential. So 刘军老师他这个学生已经也是成千上万了，原来就从国内到从中国到美国都有很多的学生跟着他得到了高分。那without further ado, I will give it to Dr. Liu, and we'll start the class.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Yan Liu. As a high school student, you're probably wondering whether you should take SAT or ACT. Which one will give you a better score? Which one is easier? And which one can be improved faster within a short period of time? The answer, unfortunately, is not as straightforward as you might think. Every student has different test-taking strength and learning styles. Based on these factors, it might be to your advantage to take one test over the other. So I start with a big picture overview based on the comparison of the test structure between the two tests, SAT and ACT, as you can see in this table. Now, both tests have 4 required sections. In SAT, there's a reading section, and writing section, 2 math sections. One math section allows calculator, the other one does not allow calculator. But in SAT, when the score is calculated, the reading and the writing will be combined within one SAT reading and writing score. And the 2 sections math will be combined into one score for math. For ACT, there's also 4 mandatory sections: reading, English, which corresponds to writing in SAT, math, and science. And both tests have an optional essay section. Now, if you look at the total amount of time, they're actually similar. And the SAT has a little bit longer period of time, like 15 minutes longer than ACT. And one thing I want to point out, as bolded in the table here, you can see that in terms of the amount of time you have for each question, ACT is shorter. That means for ACT, speed is more important than SAT. Now let's take a look at a detailed comparison between SAT and ACT for the math portion. Now, in terms of structure, as you have seen in the previous slide, SAT has two sections. One allows calculator and one does not allow calculator. And then in ACT, there's only one math section which allows calculator. However, as I have told many times to my students, even if a problem appears in a calculator allowed section, it does not necessarily mean you should use calculator to solve this problem. Most of the time, a problem can be solved much more quickly without a calculator. So keep in mind, don't overly rely on your calculator. Then let's move on to the question type. SAT, all the ACT math questions are multiple choice questions. However, SAT still keeps its grading questions, which means that students have to produce their own answers without choices to guide them. But the grading question only accounts for about 20% of all the SAT questions. The rest are multiple choice questions. Then let's move on to the topics that are covered in SAT and ACT. Now, SAT has four major categories: algebra, which accounts for 61%, problem solving and the data analysis, which accounts for 28%, and the remaining is for geometry, trigonometry, and complex numbers. All three combined together will account for only 10% of all the SAT questions. But if you look at ACT portion, as more categories. The pre-algebra accounts for 20 to 25%. Elementary and intermediate algebra combined together will account for 30 to 40%. Geometry, 35 to 45%. And finally, trigonometry, 5 to 10%. Now, by comparing the types of topics covered in SAT and ACT, you can clearly see some major differences. Algebra is the focus in SAT. And the geometry has little emphasis in SAT. And in contrast, in ACT, you can see that geometry now accounts for much higher percentage than SAT. And the similar trigonometry also accounts for a higher percentage than that in SAT. Okay, so if you're not very strong in geometry and trigonometry, then SAT was probably your best, is a better bet for you, at least for the math portion. Then finally, in terms of content coverage, and you can also see based on the numbers I just showed you for the topics covered, and ACT covers a much narrower range of topics. But ACT tests you deeper understanding for math. What does it mean? And for students who have done some SAT practice, you will notice that reading comprehension is actually very important for doing well in SAT. That means to do well in SAT, you not only need to know the math content, but also understand how the question is framed, what the question is actually asking you, okay, which is not that straightforward, which I'm going to illustrate to you with some examples. But for ACT, it has a much wider range of topics. For example, logarithmics, matrix, sequences, permutation, and combination, which will not show up in SAT, but may show up in ACT. But on the other side of the coin, ACT is much shallower in terms of testing how well you know these topics. And the questions tend to be more straightforward compared to the math questions in SAT. Okay, just to illustrate to you what I mentioned earlier, and SAT questions require more problem comprehension compared to ACT, and ACT questions are more straightforward. It's very hard to find exactly the same questions that will appear in both ACT and SAT. So I'm trying to find two that are similar enough. Okay, so if you look at the left figure, that's an example taken from a real SAT new SAT test. And basically, the problem asks you to find g of 9. G of x is not shown in this figure. The problem only shows you the graph of fx, which is a linear function. The problem says that the slope of the graph of linear function g is 4 times the slope of graph f. Then ask you to find g of 9. Now, in order to find g of 9, first of all, you have to find g of x. But you cannot find g of x until you find out what fx, the slope of fx is. right? So it's very twisty. You first have to figure out the slope of fx based on the graph. Then you find the slope of g of x. Then based on what the problem tells you that g passes through this point, 0, 4, then you come up with a function for g of x. Then you substitute 9 into x for g of x. Then you find the answer. Okay, so it involves multiple steps in order to solve this problem. Now, if you look at the ACT example, which is on the right, and it's much more straightforward, right? And it just simply asks you to find an equation that represents a line, and it tells you the slope of the line, and also tells you a point that the line passes. Then you can quickly solve this problem using what you have learned, that how to come up with linear function based on slope and then the point on the line. Okay, if some students can do this problem quickly, you can quickly pick the right choice. Okay, now let's change our focus to science. Hey, you may say that there's no science section in SAT. Yes, that's right. But that does not mean you will not be tested your science knowledge in SAT. In fact, you will see 2 science passages in SAT reading, as well as questions of analyzing graphs and tables. However, ACT continues to have a lot more science questions and more complicated questions compared to SAT, especially regarding reading experiment designs. Now, if you see some experiments or studies that appear in SAT reading, you usually just need to understand the findings of these experiments. Or you may only see very simple graphs that are very straightforward, easy to interpret. But when it gets into ACT portion, if you see an experiment, you will see questions that ask you how the experiment was designed. And you will also see very complicated graphs. Again, I'm going to show you, the good news is that for both SAT and the ACT, you don't really need advanced knowledge to do well. Okay, all you need to know is to analyze, to understand information presented in the passages. Then you will solve the problems. Okay, so again, I'm going to show you some examples to illustrate what I meant. And I will start with an SAT example. And this example is taken from one of the real SAT tests, the new SAT tests. And this is a figure. And of course, when you see a figure, you first need to read the title of the figure to figure out what this figure is trying to tell you. And the title says that, and this figure shows organic yield as a percentage of conventional yield by crop type. And in this figure, different symbols, the shapes of different symbols are used to different types of crops. And 5 different symbols, shapes are shown here to represent 5 different crop types. And so for this graph, you only need to read the horizontal axis, right? 100% means that the organic yields 100% of the conventional yield. And the farther away a point is from this 100% line, that means the lower the percentage of the organic yield. So based on the information, you can answer the questions shown on the right. It says which of statement is best supported by the information provided in this figure. And if you go down the choices, you can see B is correct. B basically says that organic field as a percentage of conventional field is similar for cereals and all crops. And you can see that because these 2 points align, they have the same percentage on the x-axis. So next, let's look at an ACT type of question. Wow, okay, look at this graph, how complicated it is. Right? It has a lot of variables shown in the same graph. And the problem says, based on the figure, a sound of given frequency will have the highest density for which of the following sets of conditions. And then these are the choices. And it says sound is passing through what, and the S represents the variables you see here. Okay, now, don't panic when you see a very complicated graph in ACT. Now, the graph looks complicated simply because it is trying to show lots of variables within one graph. For any given question, all you need to do is just zoom in the part in the figure that is referred by the question. So what is referred by the question? It mentions intensity, right? It mentions intensity, which is density? That's the horizontal axis, right? That's the intensity. And what is the condition represented here? There are two things here, air or water, and the sound is passing through what? The highest intensity corresponds to the rightmost vertical lines in this figure. So you can see that this dotted line represents the highest intensity. The condition is, you see that's water, and S represents 100%. Okay, so now you can crack this problem. Okay, it doesn't look that bad, although the problem looks very complicated. Okay. All right, now let's look at some examples of passages. Now, like I said earlier, and you will see two science passages in SAT reading. And if you see an experiment or study that was mentioned in the passage, focus on the findings, okay, not the design. Focus on the findings, and especially the findings that are relevant to the purpose of the experiment. Now, because of for the sake space, I didn't copy all the entire passage here, but the background or context of the experiment mentioned here is that sometimes scientists are trying to compare mental athletes and some average people to see how they are different. Particularly, they want to find out whether these group of people, these two groups of people have different brain structures, or they simply use different parts of brain when they are trying to remember things. And here's the finding. And the first paragraph says that there's one telling difference between the brain of the mental athletes and the control subjects. Now you see the column, then you need to pay attention to what's the main difference. And the next paragraph keeps saying something more additional surprising finding. Okay, and then according to the passage, when compared to mental athletes and individuals in a control group in McGuire's second study, what's the finding? What's the conclusion? It says that they exhibited different patterns of brain activity. Okay, so again, if you see experiments or studies that appear in SAT passage, focus on the findings that are relevant to the purpose of the study. Okay, they may report you a lot of findings which are relevant, which are not relevant to the purpose, and you can ignore that, at least when you read the passage the first time. And if a question asks for some details, which is not about the finding, you can always come back to the passage and read that part of the passage. But you don't want to spend time doing that the first round. Okay, so here's a passage taken from the ACT Science Pass section. And it describes one study. There are multiple studies, but I'm just showing one of the studies. It says that this study involves 6 trials, and it describes how the experiment was designed. And here's a question. A controlled variable is a variable that is held constant. Now, you need to know this even if the problem doesn't tell you. Right? If you have studied science at school, you should know what control variable means, and which were the 3 control variables in trials 4 to 6. And in ACT Science, you always see tables for some research summary passage or passage that describes experiments. The tables typically show the design of the experiment and the findings of the experiment. Okay, so you need to know how to read tables to do well in ACT Science. So what is constant? What is kept constant in this table? Just focus on trials 4 to 6. You can see that the column MP has the same value, right? 0.01 kg the kilogram. And what else are kept constant? It is mentioned in the description of the experiment. It says that various combinations of MP and V were tested, while MB equals 2 kg and the K equals 3.0 Newton per meter. So these are the 2 additional variables that were kept constant during the experiment. Therefore, there are 3 variables that were kept constant in this experiment. These were the 3 control variables, which are MP, MB, and K. So with that, you can pick the answer. Okay, so by this time, you hopefully that you have a better understanding of the differences between SAT and ACT in terms of math and the science. And next June, we'll take over and tell you the differences between SAT and ACT in reading, English, or writing, and essay.
Hi everyone, this is June from 7EDU. OK， 大家好，很高兴又见面哈。那么在这里的话，我会讲一讲 reading 和这个在 SAT 和 ACT 的这个 different 上。那么大家应该可以看到我的这个 screen share， 对不对 ？OK， 好 ，so let's start it. OK, so now this is a big question. A lot of kids and parents is keep asking us like, what should I do? You know, which one I should take? I should take ACT or I should take SAT. Is there any differences? Okay, so basically you can search the Google. I mean, you can Google the information. There are tons of like articles talking about the difference between SAT and ACT. Unfortunately, there's nothing show you directly which one you should take. So I know a lot of kids, you know, they are suffered a lot, right? They try to take SAT and at the same time they want to do the ACT. We don't recommend that part because that can make your kids like very distracted and thinks that two test is very different, and for some part maybe they have overlap part, but most of time, you know, it's really hard for them to focus, and also it's not good for them to, you know, focus one and get high score. Okay, so today we're going to compare the two type of test according to SAT and SAT, and from the reading and the writing section and the essay section. Okay, and we will see the difference, and hopefully you can join me and say the difference and then make your own choice. Okay, so let's start it. Okay, all right, for reading section, you can tell, you know, basically SAT looks longer, right? And ACT looks shorter, right? So for the SAT part, they give you 5 reading passages. Usually it's a little bit longer than ACT. And for ACT, they only give you 4 passages, okay? So basically around like 85 lines for each passages. All right, so now the second part I want to check is the question type. Okay, I want you guys to check about those different question type and the percentage. Okay, so those numbers, okay, I just calculated according to the, you know, the frequency they show up in the real test. Okay, so you can tell the big picture question, SAT, a little bit more than the ACT. Okay, so if the words in the contest, so the ACT a little bit more, okay? So inference question usually it show up in SAT, and ACT is not that directly show you the inference question. And the purpose question, okay, SAT more than ACT, okay? An evidence question, definitely SAT is the only one to offer this kind of, you know, evidence question, but ACT, they never show anything. And a function question, SAT focus a lot, and ACT, they focus on rhetorical stuff. I will show you example later, okay? And for the detail one, which is like ask you about a reason, about things, okay, so you can tell like the SAT and SAT, they both very important. I mean, they show a lot, right? And ACT, the details a little bit more than SAT according to different question types. So I cannot strictly like categorize them into the different, you know, this 2 type, but I will show you the difference later. Okay, for the topic, SAT, they give you the fiction, social science, and the historical, political speech, or whatever. Okay, so as long as they can find something which is like awkward and hard to understand and not that enjoyable, they give you for SAT. And the ACT kind of like safe, because most of the time they give you 4 passages, they give you fiction, social, and they give you nature science and humanity or stuff like that. So one thing is SAT is very different from ACT is, in the SAT reading section, they give you pair passage for sure. However, in the ACT part, they just use the pair passage according to the different type of, you know, the 4 type of the passage, which means they might give you the pair passage for the fiction or social science or natural science or humanity. Okay, well, okay, so let's check some example. Okay, so I started with the example which is like the most interesting one for most of the students, because, you know, fiction, novel, that's the most interesting one for most of the kids, right? So you can tell like SAT, the fiction part is kind of like, you know, hard. They give you like strong conflict and they give you huge shift. Okay, so you can check the underline part. The underline part, you can tell basically the writer is trying to, you know, describe the character. The character is reading a book and trying to get into the book, and they were trying to tell like the emotion, describe everything, and what they read on the page 177, stuff like that. And all of a sudden they make a huge shift. They switch to the surroundings, which is the restaurant, right? So usually for the SAT fiction reading, they ask you to focus on the big picture. So you have to do that, and you have to find out the conflict of the fiction. You have to find out the storyline, okay? However, it's going to be easier for ACT. So you can tell this is the ACT fiction. Okay, so they give you very clear structure. They tell you like when you grow up in reality, okay, and then they just run to repeat it, and then they give you like early town for it. Okay, then they say what I said, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is like a clear structure that shows it easy for student to get the main idea and the storyline for ACT, okay, especially for the fiction part. All right, so now let's move to the question type to say what's the difference between the SAT and ACT. Okay, all right, so let's check this one. This is a very common question in both SAT and ACT. Okay, so you can tell they were asking you about the main purpose of the first paragraph, okay? And also in this part, they also say the last paragraph, they want to say the purpose, but instead of saying the purpose, they say in order to, okay? So we compare the two tests, we find out for the SAT, the answer choices is shorter, okay? But they're more similar. Okay, so that means that you have more distraction. It's hard to tell which is which. So for most of time, students, they struggle between two answer choices. Then usually they choose the wrong one, okay? And for ACT, you can tell the answer choices is longer, which is differences is bigger, right? So you can tell which one, present what, and usually the content's quite different, okay? So according to these differences, we feel like for this type of question, ACT easier, okay? ACT easier. Okay, now let's check another question type. Okay, so left side is SAT, okay? They were asking about like phrase or words in a context, what they're trying to tell. Or they ask you about, okay, what is the reason, okay? On the right side, the same thing. You need to know the reason. You need to know the reason, and then you can find out the answer, okay? So same thing. We can find like SAT is what? It's clear, right? It's clear. And you don't need to like read carefully because this is like very clear show you want to find an inference question, right? And for the ACT, the question is very long, and you need to read it very carefully to find out what they really want to ask you, okay? So in this situation, we find like ACT a little bit harder than SAT, okay? Because we all say like for ACT, as long as you understand what the question asks you, okay, you're already half there, okay? All right, so let's move to the next question type. Okay, so this is like both tests, they offer you words in a context, okay? So SAT, they give you the words in context, the ACT, the same thing, okay? So the difference is answer choices. For SAT, you need to understand about the sentence. At the same time, you need to have a certain type of vocabulary, okay? However, for ACT, you don't need to that kind of, vocabulary. You just need to understand what they say. So ACT focus on understanding more than SAT, okay? Okay, next type. Next one is pair question, okay? Pair question. So you can tell this is only SAT show, okay? And ACT, they doesn't show anything. So SAT, the pair question, is kind of like the biggest feature for the redesigned SAT. And I think the College Board is so proud of they create this kind of question. However, they are just to separate one question into two. So basically, they are two questions. So if you listened to my lecture before, you should know for this type of question, you should do it as simultaneously, not like separate them. Because if you separate them, it's very easy to make mistake, okay? So pair question is really a challenge for SAT reading. All right, so let's check next one. Next one is also only SAT. They only have SAT, they have the graph question, okay? ACT, they don't have. For the graph question for SAT, they also divide into two type of question. One, you only need to read the graph, get the number, and then answer the question. The other one, not only you have to read the passage, but also you have to understand about how they connect to each other, okay? So this is another challenge, okay? All right, so there's another type of question only ACT have. SAT, they don't have. Well, I would say so far they don't have. I'm not sure they won't have, because you feel like the two kind of tests, they are getting closer and closer. I'm not sure who copy who, but that's the truth, right? So you can tell the ACT, they were asking about what is the tone, what is the rhetorical devices, okay? So they always give you the question, ask you about the rhetorical understanding. But SAT, they barely have things like that, all right? Okay, so now compare the two types, we can make the conclusion for the reading section, right? So it's not about which is harder, which is easier. It's about which one you feel more comfortable with, which one fits you more, okay? According to your reading skill, reading ability, and the question that you feel comfortable to talk about, that's the different thinking way. So we can talk about in the next session. All right, so here is the writing part. Well, this is kind of like confusing because writing part in the SAT is called a writing, but in the ACT it's called English part. Okay, so that's why people feel like weird, because in the ACT writing is essay. Okay, all right, so they just kind of like mess up. All right, so let's see. SAT, they give you 4 passages. Okay, I would say only 4 passages. However, ACT, they offer you 5 passages. Okay, 5 passages. So let's say question type. The big picture question, SAT only offer you 20%, but ACT offer you 40%. For grammar question, okay, the SAT offer you 50%, ACT only offer you 30%. Okay, so maybe someone gonna say, oh, I'm not that good in grammar, so I can't take ACT, right? So I would say it's kind of true, but let's say the other one. So reading, editing, okay, so SAT offer you 30%, ACT offer you 30%. So most of the students, they kind of like struggle, not in grammar, but in the big picture and reading and editing, okay? So you will have your own answer. For the topic part, SAT, they focus on fiction and a social study, and SAT, they do the same thing, okay? So I would say they balance for this section, all right? So now let's check some real question. This is all real question in a real test. We want to compare them to show you how do you feel about this too, and well, that looks so cool, right? The first time to put them together, they kind of like conquer each other. All right. Okay, so let's see the SAT part. So you can tell the way they give you question, it kind of like pretty neat, right? And clean, they just insert a number somewhere between the sentences, they underline something. Okay, so this is called a big picture, okay? So they ask you if you think writer should insert the sentence or not. All right, so this is focus on what the paragraph talk about, and then choose the answer, yes or no, and find a reason. So most of students, they can find out yes or no according to they read it. So they can say, oh, it sounds right. Yeah, I would say sounds right, helps here, it works here. However, the other half, you really need to figure out what they really talk about in the paragraphs, okay? So the same thing for ACT, okay? They do the same thing. They just say, oh, if you think they should they should use the sentences, or they should use the, to accomplish the writer's purpose or something like that. So basically, same thing. They still ask you to figure out what the paragraph talk about. All right, let's check another one. This one, they were asking to insert and delete the sentences, okay? And this time they show you exactly inside of the passage. That's what they usually SAT gave to you. However, ACT, they like to give you an extra sentence, and then they do the different way, and they do the opposite way. So you need to find out. Seems like this question is kind of similar with the one we showed up before for the SAT, right? Yeah, I would say they are same. They're same, okay? All right, check one more. So this is called sentence structure test, okay? They try to test you whether you know how to combine a sentence together, or how to separate them, or how to, change them, or whatever. So the thing is, for the SAT, usually they give you longer sentence. They give you more complicated structure. However, for ACT, the structure will be easy, all right? Okay, so check one more. So here, I would say it's kind of same, right? So you can tell the SAT, they give you the punctuation test, they put into the sentences, and ACT, they just do the same thing. So the only difference is the way they present is kind of different. Because for SAT, they just give the number in front of the sentence, okay? And for ACT, they just put it under the sentence. I would say it's really like, individual or personal preference, because some people, they feel like in the beginning it looks like more, clear, feel more comfortable, and here is kind of like, struggle or not that clear. I would say, yeah, your choice, okay? Because for me, that's all same, okay? And for the design of the question, they are same, okay? They're same. All right, so after we go through all these questions, now we want to kind of slow down to talk about the huge difference between SAT and ACT. That's essay, all right? So that's also kind of, they're both optional. They're so different, and which one fits you better? And I would like to spend a little bit more time talking about the essay part, all right? So for essay part, you can tell SAT, they spend longer time, okay? And ACT, a little bit shorter. So if you are a really fast writer, I would say SAT maybe is your best choice, okay? However, even you're not that fast writer, if you're a fast reader, SAT is still your best choice, okay? And ACT is kind of like rush, so you have to really, really know how to create the template, how to create your own sentence template. So in Chinese word, we say 模板文章, okay? So it's like ACT, you have to remember that in order to speed up, okay? And for the prompt, I would tell SAT, they give you one source for reading, and they give you very short prompt at almost all the time, the same, okay? So as long as you prepared very well, you don't need to even read it, okay? For ACT, they give you 3 perspectives, and they give you a longer prompt. So, okay, you have to read it. You have to fully understand it, okay? So some people will feel like, okay, maybe ACT is easy because ACT, they ask you like personal opinion, what do you think, whether you agree or disagree. But I would say that's the hardest thing in the writing, in the essay training, okay? Before, I was thinking the same. Well, you just ask a student to tell me, like, what do you think? Okay, what is your position? What is your opinion? But the truth is, a lot of students, they have no idea which one they want to choose, okay? And because they present 3 different perspectives, because there are 3 or maybe sometimes more different voices to distract them, so it's so hard for them to hold on their own opinion and without being distracted, okay? So it's kind of like hard for me when I train my students, okay, no matter group class or one-on-one. So the most important thing for the ACT training, I have to train them how to debate and how to keep their position and how to build up their logical thinking and how to build up their critical thinking. And most importantly, how to keep on the same direction without going back and forward, okay? So that's the hard thing for me. Okay, so forget about the language or sentence because that become not that important when I train them for the ACT essay part. However, for SAT, it's gonna be way easy because you only need to train them for how to understand and analyze different sources, how to build up their structure, okay? And how to remember or update their sentence structure. In that situation, it's very easy for them to write an essay without even thinking, So that makes me feel like way easier. All right. So if we want to say what is the focus difference, I would say SAT focus more about the comprehension, okay? Comprehension. And ACT focus like how well you can evaluate and analyze complex issues, okay? I would say that's really complicated because I have experiences that I was talking with one of my students and I make him cry, and he's a straight A student. He just cannot figure out how to, balance the 3 perspectives and showing his own opinion. Okay, so I think that's kind of more challenging for the people who think ACT is easy. All right. So the last but not least is the score. Okay, so you can tell the SAT score, they give you 8, 8, 8, which they want to give you from reading, from writing, from understanding, all right, analyzing, all right. So for the ACT part, the new ACT in September just happened, okay? So they give you full score 12, okay? Before is like 36 and now it's 12. It's way easier to get like not that looking score, you know what I'm saying? All right, so this is the majority, like the difference between the SAT and the ACT. Now let's try some real question, okay? So let's check it out. So this is the SAT one, okay? So SAT one, they give you the passage. So Well, you may feel like very exhausted because in a 4-hour test, you already read like a lot of passages. Think about it. You read 5 passages in the reading section. You read 4 passages in the writing section. So total together is 9, right? Okay, so and then going to the essay part, you still have to read more, right? Okay, so in this situation, you have to read at least 2 times. For first time, you have to get the general idea, knowing what is the claim, what is the topic, what is the main point. Okay, the second time when you read again, you have to use your pencil to highlight or circle or underline or whatever you want, you like, the important element. When I say element, it should be, for example, like rhetorical element, statistics, word choices, okay, rhetorical question, anecdote, historical allusion. Okay, so if you know what I'm talking about, so you're halfway there. Okay, if you don't, contact me. I can explain to you later. Okay, all right, so here you can tell they ask you about read the passage, consider how the writer uses evidence, facts, example, support claim, reasoning, develop idea, connected claim and evidence, stylistic or persuasive element, such as word choices, appeal to emotion, add power, blah, blah, blah. All right, so basically, they told you already about how you have to structure the essay, okay? So I know a lot of parents, they send me some articles, from some kind of like so-called expert or so. They tell you guys how to create your own template or something. But a lot of them, they are not right, okay? So I would say you have to always stick to the College Board requirement to say, okay, your essay's body paragraph should include 3 points. So most of the time, I would suggest my student to stick to the 3 points, okay? So the first body paragraph, you should write evidence, analyze the evidence, how they use examples, how they support the claim. And the second paragraph, you need to make reasoning analyze, right? You need to tell them how the writer developed their idea, okay? And the last paragraph, you need to tell them about the rhetorical element, like word choices, blah, blah, blah. And then introduction and a conclusion, okay? So basically 5 paragraphs, all right? Okay, so now let's see. Okay, this is very important to read, okay? So I wanted to read this one and to check. You see, be sure that your analyze focus on the most relevant feature of the passage, and your essay should not explain whether you agree or not. You know what I'm saying? All right, but focus on how the writer builds an argument, or like how the writer, start like talking about the claim, okay? Persuade his audience, all right? So this is very important. That means no personal opinion, all right? So now we totally switch to a different style, which is like, well, fray, right? Okay, you have to show your opinion, okay, whatever you want, you like, okay. So we call it ACT, okay? So ACT essay is kind of like a struggle, okay? So I told many of my students, I say, calm down, okay, read the perspectives before you go into the prompt, okay? Because you want to make your mind clear. You want to make your mind clear without any distraction and find out which part you have things to talk about. All right, so let's check the first one. The first one, they say, our society should strive to achieve the greatest good of greatest number of people, blah, blah, blah. So basically, after you read the perspective 1, you have to find out what they really talk about, which means you have to summarize it, okay? Summarize it. If you don't summarize it, it's very easy for you to only talk 1 point of that prompt, which is not that good. All right, so after you find out each perspective, you need to find out like how to correct them, how to make up your own choice, right? So the best way is choose one, discard the other 2, okay? That's common one. However, sometimes the ACT essay, the third perspective or the first perspective, they will give you a totally different kind of topic. For example, the first one, they talk about, I'm a singer. The second one, they talk about, I don't want to be a singer. The third one, they talk about musical education, all right? So what do you have to do? You have to disagree or agree with one of the two in the beginning, and then you have to analyze the third part individually. All right. So it really it really depends on how they test you, how is the perspectives. So I think the best way is I want you to analyze different prompts. So for my students, I usually give them a lot of prompts, like different style, let them to practice one by one, not for writing down, but just like for analyzing them, because as long as they can just be, just finish like very fast, it's really easy for them to put on a paper. Okay. Because most of my kids, they're like local kids, and, for them, the hardest part is not like writing sentences. The hardest part is how to break the question and how to break the prompt, right? Okay, so this is the hard part, and we want to know. And also, this is the prompt. They ask you to plan an essay. They ask you to what is the usually do, and what is like you want to agree with or disagree with. This is kind of like not that helpful. Okay, all right. So this is SAT and ACT differences analysis. Okay, so if you have more questions, okay, you can just contact us. All right. So now here's my question: what is your choice? You want an SAT? You're an ACT, okay? So hopefully today's lecture can help you out, all right? So